Warning. This podcast is about the realities of working in people operations. This is not a stuck-up, PC, compliance-based, or employment law podcast about stuffy, outdated HR practices. Shit will get real here, and we assume no responsibility.
I have what they call the joy of missing out. I do not like
JOMO.
I have JOMO hardcore. I do not like participating in social events. I do not like participating in
We know how much you
builders.
love team building. So
I cannot stand icebreakers.
This is the People Problems Podcast with Alexa Baggio and Tyson McKenzie.
What's up, Tyson?
What is up? We have made
doing?
it. We have made it.
It is our last
end of the year.
episode of the year. I can't believe we're here. I can't believe another year has gone.
I know.
Goodbye, 2022. Don't let the door hit you.
I think we're all ready to say goodbye to 2022.
You know,
really.
I feel like I've said that for the last 3 years, and this one I might mean the most.
Yeah.
Ready for a new year.
It's been a lot. It really has been a lot. Yeah.
It's been a lot. It's time. I know it's just days on a calendar, but I'm mentally ready. Besides celebrating the guests we're going to highlight and the episodes we're going to highlight in this recap episode, which I'm excited for, I'm ready to put the rest of this year behind me.
Yeah. And you know what?
Ready for new things.
Reflecting as we were kind of going through, some of our episodes and all of that, like we really did have some amazing conversations, which I'm super proud of. I'm super proud of the work that we've done. We had some
dope conversations. We have grown our following a ridiculous amount. So thank you to all the people who've listened to our crazy asses for the year or recently. Welcome. We're happy to have you. And yeah, so this is going to be a quick recap episode of the year. This is not only some of our most popular episodes from the year, but 8 clips of most popular episodes, as well as some of our favorite guests. So some quick clips from the year just to recap and do a quote unquote 2022 wrapped. Here we go.
all right, our first episode from the year is episode 71, Employee Love Languages with Eric Kursach. This is an awesome episode. We had a lot of fun making it, obviously because Eric's just a great guest, but also because love languages or DISC assessments, or really any assessment, is just a super fun tool to talk about. We had a great time with Eric.
Anything can work.
I definitely need a natal chart personally. I need to know what time you were born, when you were born, and where you were born so that we can properly have a good communication.
I will say I find most of that to be hooey, and I really love to tease Tyson about it, as people know. But I also think it is helpful because, do I believe in the astrology charts? I don't know. I have no idea if I actually believe in it. I am a textbook Leo based on every definition of it I've ever read. But what I do find, just to use a silly example to illustrate your point, Eric, is that it can be a helpful tool in getting someone to understand what you're talking about, or giving someone like a multi-dimensional tool that is easier than saying, I am this one thing. It's these tools allow people to communicate in saying, I am a part of a multi-dimensional thing, and here's where I fall in it. Or where I identify with it. So what I'm trying to tell you is that I fall on this part of the spectrum, right? Or I hold these traits very dear, or I have this kind of communication style, therefore I struggle with this other one, right? They're trying to give you context because these are all multi-dimensional assessments. They're also all, to say you are a Leo or to say you are a Virgo is to assume like 30 different things about a person, none of which are all true for anyone, regardless of what their star sign is. But same thing with DISC. I'm not all D and all I, like everyone has an S and a C, right? And so it gives you, it's kind of like a layered way of communicating and giving people context that I think helps lessen the intensity and the unforgivingness of things like I'm an extrovert or I'm an introvert, which can be really harsh to people.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a wonderful point, and it's baked into the language of DISC. We say that we prefer one or another styles. As soon as you say it, I am a C, which I am, I prefer the C style, I'm putting myself in a corner, and it's a crutch. It's like, well, I'm not capable of stepping outside of my comfort zone. I'm incapable of connecting with you or leading you or selling to you or influencing you because I'm showing up with this particular style. And that's a fixed mindset. There's no growth there. And so the language we use is, well, I prefer this style.
Self-limiting belief.
Yeah, I prefer this style, and I am just as capable of anybody else at adapting or flexing. I can, my comfort zone tends to be that of someone who identifies as being introverted, but I have so much to learn from, my extroverted friends. And I may not become extroverted myself, but, I can adapt in ways that I learn things about me and about you that benefit both of us and certainly benefit our relationship.
What are some examples? Sorry, just before you go, we go into that. Like, what are some examples of people like recognizing that? Maybe more common workplace examples are helpful, like where these assessments are like, oh yeah, oh okay, I can do this better, or, oh, I can learn from you. Like what's like some examples of how this gets implemented?
The first thing that comes to mind, because I've been working with a lot of sales teams, is there are some folks that shy away from the sales word and they say, well, I don't know if I like
Everyone
that.
Thinks
I'm not
sales
sure.
is a dirty word.
Yeah, I'm not sure,
So
which
ridiculous.
it isn't. I mean, it's not a negative thing. But some people just have their connotations, and maybe they've had a poor experience buying a used car. I don't know. But
Carvana, kids, Carvana. No humans involved.
So then you can make an assumption that, okay, in order to be good at sales, to thrive at sales, you have to show up with that influencing style where you're very actively paced and focused on people and relationships and energetic and can talk a million miles a minute. And if that's your perception of sales, I can understand why some people may be turned off by that. Well, as it turns out, all four styles can sell in different ways. So DISC then as a model says, all right, well, what if you show up with that S style? So you're still people focused, but you're not as actively paced. You're a better listener. Well, I might want you then selling a multi-million-dollar service over the course of 5 years, nurturing that relationship, because that's what you do, is you nurture relationships over time, and you're very steady in terms of how you go about your work. If I need to close the deal very quickly, I'm going to want somebody who's in that D or dominant style comfort zone. If I want a salesperson who's going to make sure that all T's are crossed and I's are dotted, I'm certainly going to call on somebody who's going to prefer that C or conscientiousness style, because there's no room for error in how we're presenting this sale. So that's just one example, I think, of where someone comes in and says, well, geez, I can't do that because I'm not fill in the blank. And then DISC reminds you, as it turns out, we each bring different strengths to, in this case, a sales role that can be beneficial.
What you'll find in astrology is that people are always like, this is why I think it's so funny, is people are, oh, I'm a Virgo or I'm a Sag. And it's like, okay, well, which of the characteristics of that are you taking out and assigning to yourself for your own benefit, right?
I feel like
I say I'm a textbook Leo, and that's usually all of the good parts of being a Leo, like the center of the universe, brave, courageous, attention-seeking, blah, blah, blah. And then I'm also like, yeah, but I'm attention-seeking, and I'm the center of the universe, and there's like some real negatives here. But you get to pick and choose, and then you sort of get to chew on that choice, which I think helps people maybe think of themselves and their colleagues a little differently. Because they have a new language to use, to your original point, Eric.
So I feel like next time you get feedback, just be like, baby, I was born this way. It's like literally like that's what Alexa's saying. She's like,
me and Lady Gaga.
Yeah.
I think we start with that self-awareness piece, but Alexa, you tied it up really nicely. It's learning more about the people that you're working with and understanding that so-and-so isn't just whatever language you used earlier, just a pain in the butt. They just see the world differently, and that's okay, and that's actually more than okay. That should be celebrated, because that's going to allow me to do my best work, because there are going to be relationships and challenges and projects that show up that I'm not suited for, I'm not interested in, fill in the blank. If I know that I have Alexa on my team and she can run with that, then fantastic. I can get out of my own way and give that to Alexa, and then Tyson shows up and brings a completely different set of strengths. Well, great. Then maybe I can delegate something that I'm not going to do as well or just don't have interest in. Or I can be intentional about that and say, no, wait a minute, this is putting me outside of my comfort zone in a way that actually could be beneficial to me. That, if my natural inclination is to delegate it to somebody else, because I'm somebody who's analytical, this is far too big picture for me. I'm not sure that I can wrap my brain around it. Maybe that Stoic philosophy has sort of the obstacle is the way, the sort of mentality that thing that seems like it is working to your detriment.
I literally wear that Stoic pendant around my neck.
Yeah, so there's Ryan Holiday and all these books out there, but the obstacle is the way. maybe for me, the obstacle is this thing that threatens to push me outside of my comfort zone that I would normally distance myself from. In this case, it might be the very thing that I should be moving toward.
Right. Or the colleague that you find frustrating that you're like, oh, that's because they come at this from this other angle. I wonder what it would mean if I could figure out how to see it this way or work with this person.
So instead of how can I close my office door on this person, how can I invite this person in, and sit down in conversation and not to become them, not to change, leopard or cheetah never changes its spots, whatever the terminology is, not to become that person or to become that style, but to learn to grow more comfortable with it and adapt.
Right. Broaden your horizons.
To aspects of that style when it's beneficial for me to do so.
Totally. Yeah. And I think it's really important to remember that these are really good tools for how people see and operate in the world. The other piece that's really important that we neglect all the time in working relationships is the why people do things.
Yeah.
So you can have a really high D or a really high I, but if you don't understand why they are that way or what they are planning to do in their lives that's important to them, that puts you in front of them during the workday, this language will fall short. You will not be able to communicate certain things.
And there's some why certainly built into DISC. So, for example, the how for me in terms of how I go about a project might be that I'm going to be dotting my I's and crossing my T's. There's a certain behavior that you can anticipate from me. But the why that's built into that is that I just value accuracy. I have the strong need to be right, or at least not wrong about things. That a D, that someone who prefers that D or dominant style, they're not going to be much about the small talk, and so the how for them is going to be getting right to business and jumping into the bullet points of whatever needs to get done. The why for that D or dominant style might be that they value achievement and they just want so badly to make progress and need to make progress that, any small talk is going to get in the way of them getting things done. So you have that why built in, but we're so much more than our DISC styles. We are the sum of our upbringing, our morals and ethics.
I am what time and circumstance have made me.
Yeah, right. What Tyson said about, what time of day you were born and all of that stuff. There's so much more that makes us who we are, but we need to start somewhere to better understand ourselves and other people. I happen to be a fan of DISC, but there are so many different languages out there that people can sink their teeth into.
I think DISC is a great tool.
Next up, we have episode 59, No Fucks Given, and Other Misconceptions with HR Tracy. I absolutely loved having the opportunity to connect with HR Tracy. I loved this conversation. Basically, we pulled all the misconceptions from the audience about HR and we just riffed. And we talked about whether they're true, whether they're false. And you know what? Some of them were true, but needed a little bit of extra context. This episode was really amazing because we actually started the conversation on our podcast and then we finished the conversation with HR Tracy. I absolutely love podcasting with other HR influencers. So this was a lot of fun. Take a listen.
Man, the more I look at this list, the more I'm like, there's a lot of these. Who submitted mean bitches? It's a misconception.
That was me.
Someone was just like, oh, misconception, mean bitches. Okay, great. LOL. Some of these are incredible.
I'm sure there are a few mean bitches in HR, though. I think I've come across a few.
I could name them.
Yeah.
All
of them?
I could, but I won't.
Yeah. Another HR reads minds. Is that a misconception that HR reads minds?
People think that, though.
In what way? You were supposed to know they wanted a raise or some shit? What do you mean?
This reminds me of marriage counseling or something where it's I'm not a mind reader. But I've never been told that. That's probably just a human nature thing that, you either are super direct and assume that people don't know what you're looking for or what you need. And so you just say it, or you're someone who expect someone to know exactly what you want. You know what this sounds like? It sounds like an HR person who recently was in a conversation with an employee who was, obviously disgruntled and expected that HR person to know that they were disgruntled. That's what it sounds like. But I could be wrong.
Yeah, it's like when someone comes to you and they're like, I have a situation, I want to talk to you, but I can't give you any of the details. And you're like, okay, so in order for me to help you, Yeah, exactly. Like I've had a few of those situations.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. That's a good point, Tyson. Yeah, I like that idea. Yeah.
Yeah. It brings up, and I don't know if this is probably on the list somewhere, but this brings up a misconception that I could see coming out of the cracks here, which is that HR knows everything. Like that you see everything.
That's definitely
like,
on the list.
Yeah, it might be a little further down here. It's a very long list again. But like that you're like fucking omnipotent, right? That like this disgruntled employee, like every single slight that they've gotten just simply because your title has HR in it versus like this person's been dealing with like, who knows why the fuck they're disgruntled. Could have been 17 different things they've never heard of. And like the misconception of where HR would have heard of those things is that like they're everywhere and everything gets back to you.
I kind of love that. It might be a misconception, but like also goals.
I was going to say the same thing.
Goals.
Like let me have so much power. Like
the freaking Wizard of Oz over here.
Cue the meme of everyone just eating popcorn while there's like office drama.
Yeah, right. And isn't there such an expectation though for us to know everything too? Like people will just come to me with questions that I can point you in the direct, but maybe that's it. People, if you're a supportive resource, then they know they can go to you with at least a good direction to go in.
We do it too. We always help. Going back to like the policies,
fielder
like
stupid questions.
Like here I am like fixing someone's computer and I'm like, look, you don't want me to do this, but
Yo, Tyson, we got to talk about healthy boundaries with you. Next up is episode 58, the 8-page coffee making policy with Steve Brown. Steve is a truly wonderful human. He literally brought a magic wand to our conversation, and we have a really good chat about what was a true story about an 8-page coffee making policy. It's absurd.
Yeah, you said something there that was important, I think, and something about like learning what the business does as well. And I think that that's where HR doesn't do themselves any favors, is we come hot out of the gate, like this is my HR thing and I want to put my HR thing on you without first understanding what the business truly needs. And we see this, and I feel like we've talked about this before, but we see this a lot with stuff like talent reviews and like new comps, new this, new that. And we start like pushing all the cool HR stuff because like, talent reviews, it's supposed to be great, right? But the business just isn't ready for it, or they're not like doing something else that's more critical, or it's not actually helpful for like what they're trying to achieve from a business objective. So I think that a lot of the times, even in this like new age of HR where like we're all trying to do cool shit and be strategic, we're trying so hard to gain trust of the business and gain credibility that we almost like push the HR stuff too much, and it turns the business off from my experience. Because I was that new HR person, like as a fresh out of school, I was like,
you were
this cool shit that we
little
can do.
overeager, overachiever. You don't say.
I was so overeager, and I'm pushing, and like the business, like they push back, right? Like that's not what they want. So I did just want to sort of double down on you sort of just passed over quickly, just the idea of getting to know the business and what they do and what they're trying to achieve, and then put the HR into that.
When I joined La Rosa's 15 years ago, my boss said this: for the first 3 months, you're going to do nothing but listen. Yes. I don't want to see one idea. I don't want to hear one idea. I don't want to hear one program. Within one conversation, I'm like, oh, we could do this, and oh, we could do that. So for 3 months, he said, okay, then the third month, we sat down and he goes, what'd you hear? What'd you see? And I learned so much more because I was in the business. One of the big shifts I've seen that I think we really need to press a lot farther, the message that keeps coming everywhere, podcasts, conferences, SHRM, is know the business. That's crap. We have to be the business. We are the business. Wherever there's people, It's HR. So it's not understanding a P&L, understanding how to do a talent review, understanding how to do an LMS, or all whatever acronym you want to throw out there. It's, if there's people, I'm there. And that's where HR happens.
I will say understanding the P&L really helps, but I'm a big proponent of that because most HR people are like, what's a P&L? I'm like, oh man.
Then you got to be
You need to know how those work, considering you are in charge of the most expensive line item on them. But yeah, I think it's really interesting to think about, because again, my sort of role in all this is the other side. Like I'm the business person that's like fighting for this function to be more functional because of all the things you guys are talking about. And it's interesting to think of HR needs to be the business because you're right, it's people. Wherever there's people, like that's the business. But the business also needs to reciprocate that sentiment, which is like needs to not be like, hey, HR, you're the guy that needs to make sure that people have an 8-page document to make coffee. Like they need to look at you and go, not Steve's fucking job, right? Like,
right.
That's
I wonder
Steve's
what
job.
had to happen. I feel like something maybe happened. Did something happen first, Steve, to make this?
Oh, absolutely. It's funny. Same company, giant dress code policy, because we had one young IT woman, now predominantly male environment, young IT woman who wore a crop top to work. And people lost their minds. She wore a crop top and she had a tattoo and a toe ring. We're like, it's evil.
Whoa.
What the hell's going on?
Toe ring.
What are we going to do? I went to her, I said, what's going on? And she goes, you said it's casual. I go, no, it's business casual. So I'm cool, thanks. Here, it's a little too casual. Can you fix that? And she says, that's it. Lost her mind. She says, I'm leaving this company. I went, wow. Ironically, she went to work for a bank.
Yeah, I think it's like, we're casual. I just am not sure you want everyone talking about your tattoo and your toe ring. You
Correct.
might want to get a little more business with your casual.
So instead of, most of my peers would be like, oh my gosh, we need to write a toe ring / halter top / tattoo policy because, so instead of talking.
Toe ring policy.
Next up, we were both starstruck in episode 61, Good Boss, Bad Boss, Ready, Go, with People Culture Collective. It was such a blast talking with Veronica, who is the most famous HR influencer on Instagram and TikTok. What was even cooler was that we actually got to meet Veronica in real life, and we recorded another episode with Veronica in the sunny state of California. So make sure you listen to that one as well, but take a listen to this one to get you started.
And so an employee comes to you, maybe you've got some real life situations between the two of you. I'm sure we could talk about 100 of them. Employee comes to you and says that you're like, okay, we've officially triggered the like good job, bad manager conversation.
Yes. Yeah, of course. So for me, if it's raised with me, the first thing I want to do is obviously validate, the information. You have to give everyone the benefit of the doubt that obviously they're coming to you, with something. And I always look at it from a point of view that I have access to leaders as well. So I have the opportunity to give that feedback in a sensitive way without making sure that relationship stays obviously operating in a smooth and that it can continue to function, effectively and efficiently. So I think first validate the information, have a coaching conversation with that employee around what things they may have done, because you want to empower them as well to have the feedback with the manager, give them that to say, hey, you know what, this isn't working for me, or I need more of your time. So that's the initial conversation, is coaching that employee to say, what have we done so far? If there are things, and obviously Tyson, you can pipe in if you think your experience is different, but if there's anything else that's around a protected right, or if it's anything kind of legal, if they're putting a formal complaint, that's a different approach. So if you have a bad manager that, it's all around your working style, your communication, all the soft skills that are missing because they're an operator and very task oriented, then how can you coach that employee to flex their style also to try and have a good operating kind of mode with the manager? And then obviously my role then is to step in also to speak to the manager's manager and say, here are the development areas for that person, that leader. And we want to help them too. And maybe they weren't set up for success when they were promoted, as it happens often when you promote people because they have technical expertise and not people leadership expertise. And so that's the way I view it in that side. On the other side, if it's a formal complaint about something, that a behavior that needs to be adjusted, then that needs to be approached in the kind of the procedural kind of HR style of investigation and things like that.
Yeah. And what I love about what you said is that it just shows the reach that HR has as well. So you're addressing it at the 3 different levels: the employee who has the complaint, the manager that the complaint's about, and then the managers who should be doing the performance management, right? So you have access to all 3 of those points and influence in all 3 of those areas, which is really great. And oftentimes in situations like this, look, sometimes people change, but sometimes people don't change. So what I like to do is I really like, when I'm thinking about coaching the employee, I really like to try to work with them in a sense of hey, how do I make this person more org savvy? So what are they not getting out of their boss right now? Is it mentorship? Is it the fact that they're whatever it is, what are they not getting? Is it career conversations? And then how can they potentially find that somewhere else? Your mentor does not have to be your direct supervisor. Okay. Like it could be someone else. Find more than one person. This is the problem that people have, is that they connect only to one person and it's their boss. And then what happens if that person goes, what if it's a great boss? And we'll talk about this, but what if it's a great boss and all of a sudden they go? Then what? You have nobody. So it's really important from like a strategic like career perspective that you don't just invest in one person, because
that's
again,
really good
like
advice. I really
it
like
is. That. Yeah. So and I think I've done that through experience. Like I've been that person. Like I've been very lucky in my career to have really, really, really good bosses. But the situation where I had a bad boss, I was lucky in that they were a bad boss because they were completely absent. That's what made them a bad boss. And it was fine for me because I could fuck off and do whatever I wanted and I wasn't bothered. That's really my main experience with the bad boss. So that's not a situation where they're like, I don't know. I've heard situations like they're taking the credit for the work that I'm doing, stuff like that. So like I was happy with my bad boss because they were completely absent. I think I spoke to them like once
in a way
ever.
You could handle.
And it was amazing because she'd just be like, oh yeah, just go do all, and nobody was watching me, right? Like I love that shit. But so yeah, that's my piece of advice to the person. Be org savvy as well. Like think about how you can kind of get what you need elsewhere, because you don't want to have the expectation that you're going to get everything from one person, even after a conversation with HR. Right? Yeah.
I just keep
you gotta have multiple men. But also,
like, you can't expect everything from your partner, right? Like, your partner is not going to be everything. You got to supplement with friends and family, everyone has that. Totally. Like, you have that friend you go out with, and then you have that friend you like eat pizza with and watch documentaries, right? Like, they don't have to be the same.
You
friend.
got it.
One just happens to pay your paycheck. So, Veronica, real quick, because Tyson just gave some good examples. What are examples of common behaviors that managers do, or situations that come up with managers that all of a sudden you're getting employees like coming into your office about this?
Oh, definitely. Number one is micromanagement. So people don't appreciate when they're not trusted to do a job. So again, the micromanagement comes from trust. So whether that manager, obviously doesn't think that the team can do the work, or maybe they're under pressure from their manager to deliver. Maybe they're having unrealistic expectations on them, and therefore they kind of pushing it forward. So again, in HR, what you have to do is look at the black and white information you're being given and see the gray areas around it. Because when people say, I had a bad boss, tell me more about that. What does that mean? What is specifically it means to have a bad boss, and what makes them bad at their job?
Our next episode is episode 60 with John Hyman. He's one of our favorite people in the employment law space and one of our favorite people on LinkedIn. We had a bunch of fun talking to him and actually did 2 episodes with him this year. You should listen to both. But this is our episode 60, Union Some, You Lose Some. It's hard to pronounce our own puns. We had a great conversation about unions, union busting, and some of the drama that has happened at Chipotle and other places this year.
You can absolutely express to employees your view of what the cons of unions are in general when they come in.
You just can't say you're going to fix it if they don't join.
Correct. Or we're going to fire you, or we're going to cut your wages, or what Starbucks just did, which is give a pay raise to all the non-union stores and not give a pay raise to the stores that are organizing.
How the fuck did they not know that was a terrible idea?
I'm not going to shit on other lawyers, but they're getting advice from their lawyers. And a corporation like Starbucks, a multi-billion-dollar international corporation, is absolutely getting advice from their lawyers as to what they can and can't do. I wouldn't have given that advice, but the advice very well could be that, yes, this is illegal and you might get slapped down if you do this. But our experience tells us that the impact might be that it might cut unionization rates at future stores by X%. So it might be a risk worth
because it gives every employee the what if they give us a pay raise and I'm in the union and I don't fucking get it. It's like it puts it right on the table for them.
It's a signal for sure. And like I said earlier, I studied this when I was in college. Like Walmart is the ultimate union dodger. They get away with stuff all the time because they're this like mega corporation. I don't know all the details and exactly how they get away with things, but
in the first world,
there have been very few successful organizing campaigns at Walmart, period. And the ones that are, they just bargain them. Like they just grind them out in bargaining. They'll bargain for 5 years and just wait for the union to go away. They're like, we're just not going to give you a contract. And they'll do enough so it looks like good faith. And they'll just keep bargaining, never reach an agreement. And eventually the union just gives up and goes away.
Yeah. That's not a best practice though. Next up, episode 68. This is why we can't have nice things. Remote work with Kaleem Clarkson. honestly, Kaleem just keeps it absolutely freaking real. And he had a no BS approach to working remote, which I think we all appreciate given the times and given the fact that remote work is just work, really. So take a listen to this episode. Kaleem gives a lot of tips in terms of how to do remote work well.
Do you have any data that says that we are not as productive or as profitable? Or, I'm sorry, the last thing, we're in the people space. I should have started with this. Were you assessing the culture and the engagement levels prior to the pandemic?
Right.
And are you able to assess those during the pandemic? And we even say, hopefully someday the pandemic will be over. Can you give yourself a little bit of time to assess those levels without making any changes to the policy after we're able to get together more safely? And we're starting to see people get together a lot more safely because you need this data to tell you what it is. Like if there's no data, then why are you making the choice? And it was funny. I was listening to one of your episodes, and I do have to say, like, I was a little stressed out because we did have to reschedule, or actually, I picked the wrong date or something. I did something messed up.
Might have been my fault. Blame me.
Yeah, the
Always
OG Connie, the OG Connie episode was unbelievable. I mean, OG Connie Marie, she was just killing and talking about unions and just talking about some of the challenges that have moved up. So shout out to Connie.
Shout out to Connie.
Connie Marie.
Big ups to Connie.
She was throwing down some knowledge, so go back and listen to that episode.
She'll love that.
But like, I would love to kind of ask her, like, what do you think? Is this a generational thing? No, number one, which I do not believe it is. A lot of people jump to that, but I actually don't believe that. Or is it a situation of HR and leadership? Let's just say leadership, not just HR. Is it a situation of leadership just being too used to the way things used to be done?
I'm going to vote for that one.
I think there's definitely a lot of that. And I think what was one of the problems early on in the pandemic was that we just kind of like shifted to remote so quickly. And like we were just doing everything like from an operations standpoint, like, okay, how are we going to get people internet? How are we going to get their computers? Like, I remember it was a scramble. Like I went into my office and like ransacked the place and took like my ergonomic chair and like all my stuff, right? Like it was just like a free for all. And there wasn't enough thought, and maybe we'll get into this with like what you do, but there wasn't enough thought in how to transition. Okay, how do we turn like what we had from like, you know, a culture perspective into like a remote experience? So like companies that I think had a really strong culture before, there was like a huge loss. That people felt as though something was taken and they were grieving the culture that they would have had in the office. Like I'm thinking like tech, right? Like the people that loved their office space versus like in other industries where like people maybe weren't as like, you know, there wasn't as strong as as good of a culture, office culture. Like they were originally pretty happy to move into this remote. So I don't know. I'd love to talk a little bit more about that just in terms of like, now that we've been here for a while, if we're choosing to be remote and stay remote, like how do we make that? How do we like basically like have the culture that we had in a remote world? Because there's just some things you can't do, right?
Yes and no. So I'm going to disagree with you. And that's what's great about these podcasts.
Yes.
We're going to get a little friction. Let's go, baby.
Leo season.
Yeah.
All right,
So
I'm keeping score over here.
I actually disagree with you. The comment that you made right there about, I actually understood what you were saying, but I just want to, you know, redefine some of the words that we're kind of using just so that we're clear. So from our experience, organizations that had a great culture were very successful in the transition of going to remote. Now, let's all, and this is very difficult, we don't use the word culture. We try not to use the word culture at Blend because nobody knows what the hell it means. Nobody knows what it means.
For everyone, Khalil.
Nobody knows what it means. There's no scholar years ago came out and said, this is what it is. And we just move forward with it. It's become like this generic word that encompasses everything, right? So Tyson, we use employee experience mostly, right? Actually remote employee experience. But what I feel like you're describing though, is you're describing people who are missing the connections.
Yes.
They're not, culture is about so many things, right? How do you get the job done?
The way we do shit around here.
Company, the way we do shit around here. You know, there's a whole bunch of things that come up with culture, and I believe that's why it's so hard to define. Like it's a culmination of so many things, right? So I believe what you're talking about is connections.
Yeah.
Like, how do we maintain those personal connections, because we are a tribal species. I learned this from watching cartoons with my daughter. We're not the hedgehog. Like the hedgehog is like an animal that lives in isolation. And I never knew that. So we're not that. We are a tribal species, hence why we've always had tribes.
Right. We crave connection.
Right. So to me, it's not actually the companies who had a great culture that have a biggest challenge. What remote work has done is exposed companies with bad culture, bad practices, bad everything.
Yeah.
Like it's really exposed it, right? So I think that's the really, really big difference.
Yeah, I think that's a great point and a good designation. I also think what's really interesting about like when everyone went remote and a lot of these poor cultures got called on their bullshit because people were like, why the fuck am I doing this 10 hours a day in front of a screen? Is the other thing that people forget is, and look, one thing I'll step back and say is I actually don't believe, and you may or may not agree with me here, Colleen, but like, I don't believe everyone needs to be making these decisions about remote or in office or all these things on these like grand policy levels. Like I just call bullshit on that whole operation. I think to your earlier point, that's some like old school thinking, which is like, this is exactly how this has to be done versus being like, if it's not a problem with the existing team that you're working with, then don't make it a problem. Don't make it a policy, don't make it a problem, right? Like we can be a little more flexible.
Next up, episode 72, Real Talk about resumes with Dan from HR. We did not hold back on this one. There were so many old school processes as it relates to applying to jobs, submitting resumes, etc., that Dan basically came in and just flipped on their head. He was extremely straightforward in the way that various algorithms and computers read our resumes and then spit that back out to employers, and basically shared the tips on how to make that process effective so that you actually get a job. Again, this is no BS as usual from one of our favorite guests, Dan from HR.
Not including cover letters anymore.
Oh my God.
Don't get me started.
Daniel, how do we feel about cover? No, please. We really want to get you started. Letters? That's literally the point of this.
To whom it may concern.
So I don't know if you saw, but I was featured in Daily Dot because one of my videos went viral, and it was about thank you notes. But in that video, I spoke about thank you notes are the most useless element of the recruiting, the whole recruiting exchange, aside from cover letters, which are just as almost useless. There are very notable exceptions. I think I helped a number of teachers translate their experience from going into education and turning into instructional designers or project managers in ed tech, and using a cover letter is a great way to introduce yourself for a large scale career change or an industry change. But other than that, and you can probably attest to this, if you read resumes, no one reads a cover letter. It is all the exact same template. Everyone uses the exact same format. They just change those 4 words. It is such an useless piece of administrative homework. And what
it's the same way I feel about those LinkedIn messages you can send when you apply to a job. Yes, everyone just sends the same boilerplate message. And I did a video that also went quasi viral about that was like, don't send me that thing. Like, don't send me the boilerplate shit because I don't read it, and all it tells me is that you clicked a button that everybody else clicked, not that you put any time into this. Like, and cover letters are the opposite because people put time into them. The first one, like the template.
The first one they build, and then after
that,
after that they just change the seven blackened words just for based on whatever the rule is. Yeah,
exactly. And it's funny because I wonder if you think there is, like, just to go back to a world where we were doing cover letters and people were taking them seriously and they were coming with a human who read them with the human who read the same resume, like. What was the real benefit of those, or where do you think the like core intent of that was? And is there something to be kept from that prior, prehistoric, I don't know what the word is, like, it's almost like a habit, right? Like that was like a career habit that we had, that everyone had to submit a cover letter. But like, where was the good in that? And is there anything to take from that?
I don't think there was, because I think what the value that a cover letter brings is that it introduced you to a potential employer. So before the time there were even resumes, people would write letters of interest after they saw a want ad and saying, "Hey, I saw your ad in the Post for a Gal Friday," or like a newspaper handler, all these like 30 and 40, 1940 positions, and you would send it, just saying, "Hey, I'm interested. Here's my experience. Here's why I think I could bring value to you. I have some experience in this, some experience in this." And that started to then morph into the resume. And then the resume and cover letter became the thing to do together. The cover letter is the letter of introduction and then your resume. Right. All of that changed with like the digital transformation of recruiting and job boards like Monster and Career Builder, where all of a sudden everyone could apply to jobs. And all of a sudden, especially like starting 2005 to 2006, every new generation just dumped so many more people into the workforce. So now instead of getting potentially 25 applicants, where someone could reasonably read every cover letter and be charmed, now you had 400 to 500 applicants. And now you're not sending it to the hiring manager anymore. Now you're sending it to a recruiter. And now there's LinkedIn that gives you the opportunity to talk about who you are and what you like and the things that you've done, so that at this point, the information you're going to get on a cover letter, you can easily find by reading the resume and reading a LinkedIn. So why this extra piece of homework, especially because most recruiters just skip them.
Okay,
right.
I'm going to be devil's advocate here for a second.
Do it.
Because I'm finding less and less value out of, like, when I'm like looking at resumes, I am so bored. I can't even like read one sentence of them. I'm like, everybody's the exact same. Everybody has the same university degree. Everybody has the same amount of experience. What I find would be valuable use of the cover letter is when I have someone, and again, like whether this is a cover letter or not, but what I want this person to do is say, this is why I'm interested in you as a company. This is why I'm interested in the company. This is why I'm interested in this specific role. I can look at their resume that's literally a cookie cutter of every other single resume and be like, okay, yeah, they've got like the bare bones, whatever. But like, if someone can say to me, like, this is why I'm right for your company, this is why I'm right for this role specifically, I do see value in that. Like, again, if it's done right. And if that's like the request, I think that there are some companies that put in their little ads that like, you should like write a letter of interest or like why you're interested in coming, that sort of thing. I think that if they are read and like reflected upon, I think that that can really be interesting. Like, I still love the question, why do you want to work here? Now, the answer is not because of the culture. That's not the answer, but there are really well thoughtful answers that can, you know, really indicate whether or not you're going to work out here or not.
So interesting points. I will say I get it to a degree. And it's funny because I have the HRBP side of wanting to make sure that I have an engaged workforce and people that believe in the company mission, because that tends to be more productive and they tend to be more engaged, especially if they feel rewarded. At the other side, I was just a candidate and I just went through that whole candidate experience. I could easily agree with you if working for your company was interesting.
And last but not least, probably one of my favorite episodes of the year was our episode on the Abercrombie & Fitch documentary called Abercrombie & Figure Your Shit Out. It was episode 50. Tyson and I had a great time watching the documentary, talking about the documentary. The documentary was a little bit of a hot mess, which you'll discover in the episode if you have not already, but it was really fun, and we're actually hoping and planning to do more Documentary Club episodes in 2023. So thanks for checking it out.
What are you trying to say?
Funny how that works. Yeah.
But no, and it was always such a big deal too if someone went to like an Abercrombie in the States to like get a picture with one of the models that was standing at the front of the store.
Yeah.
It's so strange.
I just remember being so insecure in high school and being like, I have to wear Aeropostale because I can't afford Abercrombie and Fitch. My mom won't let me shop there. And just being like, I wish I could wear more of that. It looked so good. That was like the poor man's Abercrombie and Fitch.
I remember because I got it when I was in the States and I thought it was so cool because I like came back with like Aeropostale and I'm like, yeah, like you can't get this in Ottawa. Like
no, Aero had its moment, but it was like a light post ANF moment. Anyway, the one other thing I took away from this documentary that I thought was, again, I wish they had just not done the Jeffrey Epstein and the gay guy thing. And like, I wish they had just sort of focused on this again, because we're also nerds about this stuff. But like, they also skipped over and they didn't show a lot of his interview, which was kind of a bummer, but I think I know why, which is they skip over that they bring in this chief diversity officer who basically appears to get fucking steamrolled the whole time. Like, I don't remember his testimony or his like interview as well as some of the other parts of the documentary, and I didn't take good enough notes, but like they kind of interview him. He's kind of the guy they bring in. He clearly tries to do his best, but then there's some examples where they ask him things about like, how did you feel when they did this? And he's like, I felt how you think I felt about that, but I can't comment. And you're like, wait a minute.
Yeah, so I have thoughts on this.
Yes, please. But I thought this was like the exact moment where it's like, this is a real life example of someone trying to bring in a diversity officer after the problem is fucking fully baked and it having absolutely no impact. Not because that person didn't try, but because it's just not real.
That's like a strategy. It's like the signaling strategy. So that's sort of
tokenism, but yeah.
Well, that's exactly it. But that's the exact sort of thing that companies do after they get in trouble and after like something's like brought out into the forefront. They're like, oh, look at us. We just hired this Black chief diversity officer. Like, look how good we're doing. And they made like a little like policy book or something, I feel like, from that.
This person has no budget. Like, this person has no initiatives. This person has no team.
He did report to the CEO though, which I thought was like, all right, like
optics.
It's okay. It's good optics for sure. Again, like it's all very strategic.
Or the CEO was like, yeah, cool, this guy's gonna report to me so I can keep him real close.
Yeah. And I just like felt as though that was like textbook, like what companies do like after they get their hands slapped and they just need to do something that like signals that they're doing something better. So like I
just was so glad that they put it on screen and it was like, this is the guy they hired. And you're like, this poor fucking dude. Like,
right.
He's an adult. He knows what he got into, but like the chief diversity officer, but not really, is just I just call bullshit on that whole tactic.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like, that's why it's like very much just like signaling it's not actually like effective. But okay, I want to go back. What was that thing? They had this like book. Oh yeah, This Is What Good Looking Is. Like they actually had like a book that like said
it's
exactly
like their burn book. Yeah.
Yeah. So like I thought that was like very interesting. And then like basically like the managers were rated not based on sales. So anyone who works in retail knows how like heavy it is on sales and like numbers and like if you're not meeting your sales, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
But it was based on like the attractiveness of your staff versus like actual sales. And like they kind of made a joke about how when you went in there, like the sales associates like weren't like even helpful.
Supposed to, yeah. I
like,
do remember that part.
You.
Well, apparently they actually trained them that way because they wanted it to be like, again, exclusive.
We're too cool.
Right. Which is like, if I now interact with a person in a retail setting and they're like that, I'm like, yeah, I just don't need to shop here. Like, I don't need any part of this day to be friction for me. I'm trying to buy shit from you.
Yeah.
And also, like, don't work in retail if you don't like people. But
right.
Where have I heard that before?
But like, and it even like makes like the comment about how like parents hated the stores. Like I remember like my dad would always like, cause I'd go to the States with my dad, but like he'd always like wait outside cause it's just so dark and loud. And he's like, I'm not fucking going in there.
Yeah. And there's like a fucking half naked dude on the entrance. So your dad's like, I'm all set. Thanks.
Or
honey.
an actually naked dude. Like they're there, like beckoning.
I don't know if in the Lehigh Valley, Pennsylvania, we had the live models all the time.
No,
but,
only certain ones. I feel like people when they went to like New York City, they would get the live model. They never had them in like friggin' Syracuse where like I would go.
Yeah. I distinctly remember the smells of those colognes though. Like obsessively. I remember those.
So okay, this is really gross.
Because it was like in high school you either dated a guy that wore Abercrombie and Fitch, Polo Sport, or Curve. Like I remember the smell of that cologne like nobody's business.
I actually love the smell of Abercrombie. I'm not like really big into like perfumes or fragrance anymore, but I love it. And like when I was younger, like when you'd buy the clothes and you took them home, they would like smell like the cologne.
Yep.
And I would like delay washing because like you couldn't get it here. So I'm like, oh my God, like I still like smell like Abercrombie and like I would like delay washing it because like I wanted
You're
it
like
to
a 14-year-old girl
smell.
and everybody's like, no, Tyson, you just smell like hormones right now. Wash your fucking clothes.
Like obviously within reason, but I remember like I wouldn't wash it like before I wore it. Like I would keep the smell on it. So which is like so gross.
That's so funny. Yeah, I'm glad someone made this documentary because I think the point of good documentaries is to get people talking about this shit and to bring like new lenses to life about these things. And I was glad that they interviewed some recruiters. I was glad that they talked specifically about the labor practices. I was a little pissed they didn't double click on like, okay, but what is the actual process to get a job here?
All right. That's a wrap, Tyson. That's our whole year.
Well, that's not really our whole year, but it's part of some of our highlights.
But they were some highlights.
There were a lot of other great episodes. So if everyone is new joining, I definitely would encourage you to go listen to the whole plethora of People Problems episodes. Because
check us
there's
out.
some goodies.
There's some goodies. We pushed some buttons this year for sure. and really excited to do it again with you next year.
Can't wait.
People Problems is recorded and mixed by Emma Parker at Chickadee Films with production assistance by Anna Parker. People Problems is managed by Emily Melton Lemons. For more information and to sign up for our weekly newsletter where we dive deeper into hot topics and share our great finds, go to peopleproblemspod.com. Please make sure to follow us on all things social at People Problems Pod. Follow Tyson at hr.shook and follow me, Alexa Baggio, at The Influencer, spelled with an HR. Thanks for listening and catch you next week.